Hello, my name's Kevin Large and I'd like to welcome you to the first in a series of IoT security Raspberry Pi emulation videos. In this first foundational video, we'll be obtaining the software. Some of the software will be obtained directly from the Cisco IoT Security Curriculum webpage. If you go to your Cisco IoT Security Curriculum webpage and you navigate to the course index, third icon from the left at the bottom, you now go to the lab index and then to lab 1.2.3.1, which is set up PLApp on a Raspberry Pi. The two links we're interested in are the first two, PLApp image for IoT security and PLApp launcher for Windows. The first of these downloads quite a big file. It's a zipped file and it contains the Chestnut image, which is the modified Raspbian operating system, which actually runs as the operating system for the Raspberry Pis. Physical Raspberry Pis in the case of the course, or in our case, we'll be using them on emulated Raspberry Pis. This is quite a big file, so I've already downloaded this to save time. Underneath we have the PLApp launcher for Windows. We'll download that now. This is quite a small file, about 5.8 megabytes in size. It has the functionality of allowing us to flash the Chestnut operating system onto the SD, or should I say micro SD card, on the real Raspberry Pis. If we have a little look at a real Raspberry Pi, which I have here, you'll notice that if we turn it upside down, we have an adapter slot with a micro SD card on. This micro SD card contains the operating system image, and the PLApp launcher, one of its prime functions is to assist us in putting the Chestnut operating system image onto that micro SD card. However, in our emulated Raspberry Pis, we'll use it for precisely the same purpose, but we'll use it with the QEMU hardware emulation software. The next software that we require can also be obtained directly from the Cisco IoT Security Curriculum website. So if we go back down to course index and we look at the very next lab, that's lab 1.2.3.2, set up the IoT Security Lab topology. If we follow the hyperlink, it will open up a document, and in that document, on the second page, we have a couple more hyperlinks which will download what are known as Oracle VirtualBox applications, or OVA files. One is for the Kali Linux OVA file, the other one is for the Metasploitable OVA file. We will definitely require these to do the labs. And again, these are big files, very big files in the case of the Kali Linux file. It's about 7.5 gigabytes in size, the Metasploitable is just under a gig. So I've downloaded those just to save time. If I go into my downloads folder, you'll notice that I have the Kali Linux OVA at approximately 7.5 gigabytes in size, Metasploitable just under a gig, and we also have the IoT security image with the inside we have the Chestnut disk image file, which is the operating system that runs on the real Raspberry Pis and will also run on our emulated Raspberry Pi. And up the top there we have a little PLApp launcher. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to get the rest of the software. Another critical piece of software is Oracle VirtualBox. This can be obtained simply by typing Oracle VirtualBox into Google, taking the top link, virtualbox.org, going to download VirtualBox. Currently it's version 6.1. I think it's 6.114. There we go, 6.114. Go to Windows Hosts, And this is not a particularly big download, it's 103 megabytes in size, so just under 30 seconds on my internet connection. Now obviously this version number will change slightly between when I'm recording these videos and when you're downloading them, but for Oracle VirtualBox it's always wise to download the latest version. While we're here on the Oracle VirtualBox website, we'll also download the Oracle VM VirtualBox extension pack. This will give us support for USB 2 and USB 3 devices and numerous other things. We may or may not need that in the future, but it's always useful to have. And it's a very small file. So, Oracle Virtual Machine VirtualBox extension pack, all supported platforms, downloaded. The next piece of software we're after, and this is the real critical piece of software, this is the key to the whole project, is to download QEMU. We can do this by typing QEMU Windows into Google, clicking on the link for QEMU.org download, clicking on the link for Windows, making sure that we select 64-bit. Any computer that's newer than about 12 years old should really be running a 64-bit version of Windows. And we can see older versions in the folders, and what we're after is we're after the link second up from the bottom, the .exe file, which will be the most current version. This is current to the 14th of the 8th 2020 when this video was recorded. This is 140 megabytes in size. QEMU is a hardware emulator. It allows us to make a virtual machine guest which has a different processor architecture to the host that guest is running on. This is not actually possible in VirtualBox or VMware. With VirtualBox or VMware, if we're running a AMD 64 or Intel or AMD type processor, then our guests also need to run that type of processor. Of course, the Raspberry Pis use an ARM processor, so we need to use a cross-processor architecture emulation software, and that's precisely what QEMU can do. We also need the QEMU RPI kernel. So we go to Google, type in QEMU RPI kernel. It's the first link, the one that starts DHRUV YAZ90. And there are several kernels on here. The one that we wish to use is kernel QEMU 4434 Jessie. We can click on the link. It's only 2.88 megabytes in size, and click on download. Next, we will download OSF Mount. OSF Mount is actually forensic software, allows you to mount disk images for bit-to-bit copies of entire disks or partitions, so it's very useful for digital forensics purposes. We click on the link, we click on download. Again, it's not a very big piece of software, 7.6 megabytes in size, incredibly useful, and we'll use that to modify the chestnut image. The next piece of software we're after is OpenVPN. We have to be careful with this one to download precisely the correct version. We go to Google and we type in OpenVPN Community. Click on the first link. Do not download the latest version. The latest version does not contain the functionality that we require for this project to work. Unfortunately, I did try it and it doesn't work. What we need to do is we need to download an older version. Luckily, OpenVPN keep the older versions on the website. The version we require is OpenVPN 2.4.9. And of course, we would need to have the version for Windows 10. So Windows 10, OpenVPN install 2.4.9 i601 Windows 10.exe. This piece of software will allow us to build virtual networks on a Windows 10 computer. We will be able to install virtual network adapters, we'll be able to connect those network adapters together and do all kinds of network topologies to connect our emulated Raspberry Pis to each other, to the internet, and to the Kali Linux machine. That's all of the critical software. that's required to make this project function. Now we'll have a look at some optional software which is just very useful to have, and the first of those is WinSCP. So again, Google WinSCP, download WinSCP, so that's winscp.net, English download. Partway down the page we've got download WinSCP. Take a few seconds for the download to start, and there we go. WinSCP is a secure copy program. It allows us to transfer files to and from our emulated Raspberry Pis using SSH. Another piece of optional software, but again very useful, is PuTTY. Very familiar to anybody who's using Cisco routers. PuTTY is a terminal emulation program. We can obtain this by typing PuTTY download in Google, clicking on the first link, download PuTTY latest releases. We want to go to alternative binary files, and we wish to download putty.exe, the SSH and Telnet client itself, 64-bit. This will allow us to remotely connect to our emulated Raspberry Pis over SSH. And finally, another piece of optional software, but again rather useful, is Nmap for Windows 10. So we go to Google, type Nmap for Windows 10, the first link nmap.org download. Partway down the page you will see the latest stable version, which currently is version 7.80. So I'm going to download nmap 7.80 setup.exe, 25.7 megabytes, and it's done. And that is all of the software we required to download in order to make this project work, including some optional software which just makes things that little bit easier. Thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you on the next video.